Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for coming today, and some of you, particularly for coming from a very long way away. Many of the places, those of you that aren't from Calgary, where you're from, are on my bucket list to come visit. So hopefully our paths will physically cross at some point. I like the idea of face-to-face, although obviously in this time we can't do that. You know, as I was looking at all of you log in this morning and listening to Stephen talk, I was feeling like I've been invited to present to a room full of executive chefs about cooking. And I'm not an executive chef. So I sit before you humbled and grateful to be with you. I want to share with you a bit of my story as it relates to our topic today, purpose, and where that information came from, and a bit about how I use it. If we were in the room together physically, I'd be talking about how I like to have a conversation. And I'd like for us to try and do that as much as we can. So if you're putting things in the chat box along the way, I'm going to try and respond as we go. And I like what Stephen set up so that we can go into chat rooms later to have sort of what is a takeaway conversation, then come back and talk about that a bit. But if there is something that's striking you that you want to share, or a question you want to ask, then by all means put that in the chat box, and we'll get to that for sure. So I'm going to share my screen and just take you to a PowerPoint that I've put together for us today. So it was about 5 or 6 years ago, excuse me, I launched a book entitled It's Enough to Be on Your Way, Your Path to Purpose. If any of you are James Taylor fans, he has a song on one of his albums called It's Enough to Be on Your Way. I'd invite you to Google James Taylor and It's Enough to Be on Your Way when we're done, and listen to the song. You may wonder what's the relationship between purpose and that song. Listen intently to the chorus, and you'll see why that's relevant. So again, I want to thank Stephen and Creative Mornings Calgary for the invitation to join you today. I want to sort of start off by saying I'm not a guru. I'm not a modern day mystic, although I read many of them, and I saw many of the quotes from those modern day mystics in the chat line as we were logging in. I would say, like you, I'm on my path to purpose, and somebody had quoted that purpose is a journey, not a destination, and I couldn't agree more. So at every stage of my life, I've needed to figure out, what am I being invited to do? What am I being invited to do? So my work involves regularly working with people who are in their own way trying to figure out their why, their purpose. Most commonly, we're working together, those people and I are working together because they've been forced into a transition they hadn't planned. I'm sure no matter where you live, if you're looking at the news, you're hearing stories every day about the number of people that are being impacted economically by this coronavirus and by the world economy. And there's lots of people that have lost their jobs. In Canada, you probably heard that over 1 million people lost their job last month. And so all of those people around the world had, in some measure of speaking, an idea about what their why was about, and they were engaged in it in some way. And then in the midst of all of this, that was the floor kind of fell out. And now in this in-between place, the new opportunity is to figure out, so now what? What's my why now? And this is one of the reasons that I've been embarking over the course of the last year to really intensely focus and engender dialogue on purpose with broader and broader audiences. Fundamentally, purpose is, it's our North Star. When we know our purpose, and all of those of you that I'm sure are clear on it know that as your feet are coming out from the covers, under the covers in the morning, They know where they're headed. That more commonly, you are probably looking forward to Monday or whatever Monday is for you, rather than what many people I work with are doing, which is looking forward to Friday. And I would use that as a gauge of, well, how's my life tracking? And if I find myself looking forward to Fridays more often than Mondays, that's probably indicative that something's not right, that there's some measure of work that I need to engage in. So I want to start first with the working definition that I use for purpose. And this is not to suggest that my definition by any stretch is the definition. It's one that's evolved over 30 years of practice in working with people through transition and going through 5 that you heard Stephen talk about in my introduction. So I believe purpose is the reason that you're alive now. It is the expression of who you are. And it's what you are and what's within you. It is, again, fundamentally your why. So that's purpose. And in a hierarchy of life, optimally, purpose would be at the top, career in the middle, and job at the bottom. Purpose is pointed to by the things that come naturally to us, the things that we're doing when we lose track of time. You might know them as your natural talents, your giftedness, the things that come easily to you. You know, you may have noticed this. You're working on a project or a task, whatever it might be, and you look at your watch or your phone to see what time it is, thinking it's, 30 minutes later than when you started, and you find it's 4 hours later than when you started. I don't know if you've ever experienced that before. I certainly have, and I've also experienced when I've been working on something for 10 minutes, and it felt like I've been there for a year. So that's the working definition that I've evolved. And this purpose, I believe, is printed on everything that makes up who we are. So that's expressed in how we choose to look, what we say, what we think, what we feel, what we do, what we don't do. All of it is printed on that. If people were watching us and paying attention to us, our actions, our choices, our words would be an indication of our purpose. It would tell them in one form or another, if they're paying attention, to the direction that we're headed. So before we go too much further, what I'd like us to do is to consider for just a moment why you think you're here this morning. So what I'd like you to do is just post into the chat box for a minute, why are you here today? Go ahead and do that now.
I'm here to learn something new and follow some other creatives.
Okay, thank you. So inspiration, connect with other people, help me find my purpose, remember who I am. I love that. I'm feeling a bit aimless. Definitely can relate to that. I want to learn more than I have now. Resilience, get to know myself. I'm looking for my purpose. Learn how to find my purpose. Okay, thank you for all of that. You know what strikes me is, commonly, and I ask this question every talk I deliver. And in fact, I gave a talk like this a couple of weeks ago, and we were physically in the same space. And a lot of people said some of the things that you said. Oh, I love that, to hear how my husband inspires others. And I just recognized that's my wife just posted that. Thank you. People say, well, I registered for the event, so I came. I wanted to learn what you did. I'm in transition, a range of different things. My point here is I'm inviting you to consider the possibility that in addition to what you just said, in addition to what you just posted, or what you just shared verbally, that maybe there's another reason why you're here. That maybe isn't immediately obvious to you, that there's something else or someone else that's in our immediate proximity that in fact might be the reason why we're here. And this may come up in something that unfolds over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, or hour or so that we're together. And perhaps the reverberations that occur as a result of this conversation we're going to have today. And the reason I'm bringing it up is to engage another level of awareness, another way of knowing what's going on around you. This is something that I often talk about with respect to peripheral senses. So as we go through our day, every day, we see everything. You know, you think about even what you're looking at now and the things that you're seeing as you're scrolling around the screen, as you continue to walk through your day, all the things that you see. And there's lots of things we see but don't notice. And so what I'm inviting you to do now is, in addition to being physically here, is to invite another piece of you to another level of awareness, to start noticing some of the things that may be happening in your peripheral view, whether that's emotionally or physically, and welcome them into your conscious awareness. Because packed inside of that could be the real reason, the real richness of why you came today. When we look at purpose, when we look at that question, it's not found in a menu of choices. So commonly when I've talked to people about this, or I've been in a coaching conversation with them, they have often started by saying, well, if I just knew what options there were for me out there, then I could decide what I want to do next. And so the metaphor I use in this circumstance is, well, let's just say for the sake of fun that you all invited me to come for lunch and said, hey, Richard, do you want to join us for lunch? And I said, well, sure. And then you said, well, what do you want to eat? And I said, I don't know. But I'll tell you what, why don't you send me a menu from all the restaurants in the city where you live? And then I'll take a look at them. And then when I decide what kind of food I'd like, I'll get back to you. Now, logically, that would be, a pretty straightforward approach, because, when you're exposed to that much stimulus, sooner or later, you'd presumably find something you'd like, and I could get back to you and say, here, let's go there. The only problem is that I'm sure if your city's like Calgary, by the time I got through all those menus, you and I'd both be dead about 100 years. So when we look for purpose outside of where we are physically, outside of us, in the outside world, commonly we kind of go down a rabbit hole, because purpose is found within us. This is why I put up this slide. Purpose was conceived with you. And so what I mean here is that it's imprinted on your DNA. And I'm sure, where your DNA comes from. It comes from your mom and dad and their mom and dad and their mom and dad and back and back and back. And what I mean by that is when you arrived on the planet, you already were imprinted with this innate giftedness, these natural abilities that you currently have. You didn't do anything to earn them. It's not a prize for being a good person. It's not a product of going to university or not going to university. It's an innate talent. And what I've observed in all the time I've been doing this work is that each of us have those things, that innate giftedness, and we have it for a reason. It's not an accident. And for the record, I'm not hitting you over the head with a Bible here and saying it's God in grand design and God, she or he has imprinted your life roadmap on you. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I think it's probably more science than anything else. So as we struggle to understand what our purpose is, one of the ways we can start to identify what that is to pay attention to the guideposts, the navigational beacons that are in our midst. And by that most especially, I mean you and the things that come naturally to you. So I'm going to give you a couple of questions and a bit of homework that you can take with you today. If you want to communicate with me after this, you're more than welcome to do that. I'll make sure that you have my contact info when we finish today. And the first one is that if you don't have a journal, get one. Doesn't have to be expensive. Could just be a piece of paper, frankly. And I'd like you to take that and a journal and this question out to people that know you really well and care about you. It's critically important that you meet those two criteria. These people have to know you really well and they have to care about you. If you're not sure if they care about you, then don't ask them this. So you set up some time with them. Now, if you're doing it now, you do it virtually, obviously. And the question you take to them is, what am I really good at? And the next thing you do is shut up. There's nothing you add to the conversation now. You just simply ask the question, you hold the space, and you let them respond. And in your journal, you record what you're hearing. You're not allowed to challenge what you're hearing. Because sometimes someone would say, and this may have happened to you already, someone might say to you, well, you know, you're so good at fill in the blank. And your response is, yeah, well, everybody's good at that. I mean, that's nothing special. I mean, I went to university. I got a Bachelor of Science in computer programming or whatever. So of course I'm good at it. That's why we started with, you ask the question, what am I really good at? And then shut up. Because some of you posted at the outset that you came here today because you're trying to find your purpose, you're struggling with it, you're trying to figure that out. Well, you know what? If you knew what you were really good at, you probably wouldn't need to be here today. This conversation, well, might be passively interest, but you'd already have it figured out. People are looking for this. I wrote the book. I'm having conversations with individuals and doing talks about this because people are really struggling with this question. And one of the fundamental guideposts to finding their answer is simply embedded in what they're naturally really good at, as observed by others. The second question that I'd like you to reflect on is, what do you really love to do? Now, we have to remember our brain's going to get in the way when we ask that question, because commonly, the answer that may occur to you will quickly be followed by a parent tape saying, well, you know, come on, honey. I'm you know, it's nice that you like to do that, but you can't earn a living doing that. I mean, let's be serious. You have to get a real job. So turn the parent tape off and let's focus in for the moment on what do you really love to do, and reflect on what others have said you're really good at. And those are really two of the building blocks that make up this purpose of yours and what it is. Are we doing okay so far?
Yep.
Okay. One of the challenges that I think sounds like being critiqued. Explain your work, shut up and accept your critique. I'm not sure I'm getting that. Sounds like being critiqued. Explain your work. Shut up and expect your critique. I'm going to try and extrapolate what that means. When I say go to the people that know you and know you well and care about you, and ask them, what am I really good at? The reason I'm saying shut up, I'm saying that to you. What I'm saying to you is this isn't a conversation you have. It's not a dialogue with them. It's you asking them the question and then waiting for whatever they share with you. And it's not a question of discussing it with them once they've told you. And certainly it's not debating what they've shared with you, but simply accepting what they've shared with you. That's why it's so important these people know you well and they care about you. So if you're thinking the person you're going to ask is going to take you down a come to Jesus conversation and share with you all your faults, that's not someone you want to have this conversation with. That's not helpful. I suspect if you're like a lot of people, you may have had too many of those already. So hopefully that's oh, I see. Okay, you're agreeing with me. Okay, shutting up now. All right, so one of the things people in my line of work, so people that work in a career space, have done, and it's really a curse to the world, is we've asked this question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we've doubled down on it by setting up this expectation that we'll administer an interest assessment, a career assessment of a sort. And from the product of that, we can help you decide what you should be when you grow up. As if your purpose is embedded in some psychometric assessment. So as I said at the outset, the answer to this question you're seeking is resident within you. That's where it's always been. That's the only place it'll ever be found. These external assessment instruments can be helpful, but they're not really rooted in your purpose necessarily. So I want to tell you a quick story. Stephen, can I just do a time check with you?
I think we're good. You got at least another 10, 15.
Oh, okay, good. So I was in grade 10 in high school. I was attending Loyola High School in Montreal. So it was a private boys' high school. Jesuit priests were the teacher, most of the teachers. So it was a very open-minded and flexible learning environment. By the way, I'm sarcastic, if that wasn't obvious. So in grade 10, I wasn't performing very well. My parents thought, well, this isn't going well. Let's figure out what's going on with this kid. So they sent me to a vocational center. It was the Jewish Vocational Center in Montreal to go through this battery of assessments to figure out what's going on with this kid. So over the course of the following 3 weeks, I went to this center every day after school for 2 hours for a battery of tests. Psychometric, psychiatric, psychological, interest, and aptitude. And every way a person could be tested except drawing blood, I was tested. Well, I guess I didn't have a colonoscopy at that age, but at any rate, I digress. And the product of all of that was, at the end of it, the program director, the psychologist sat down with my mother and me and said, well, Richard, we want you to know that as a result of our findings, we've determined that you are of average to above average intelligence. I'm still not sure I know what that means. And the career that's best suited to you is to teach. And in fact, the findings are so strong that there really is no other career option that we feel would be relevant for you. We feel so strongly, in fact, that you would do well to accelerate completion of high school, which in Montreal at that time was grade 11, and then go to Montreal Teachers College, which was a 12-month program at the end of which you'd get a teaching certificate. I could have been teaching your children language arts, having completed 4 years of high school and 1 year of Teachers College, which frankly should have most of you laying in bed at night in a cold sweat. Because what would I know being, 19 years old with a teaching certificate to teach people? And now some of you may be hearing this and thinking, well, that sounds pretty cool. Are they still open? Do you have their website? Because I want to go do what you did, because if they're going to hand my future to me in a report and give me all the reasons why that's what I should do, then that's what I want too. The problem was I got this gift, and what I chose to hear instead was, Richard, you're not very smart. And believe us, we've tested you every way we possibly could. And we've confirmed, no, you just aren't very smart. In fact, you're really not smart enough to do anything other than teaching. Now, quickly, let me apologize for any offense that I've inflicted on any teachers here present. My wife, coincidentally, is a teacher. My sister is a teacher for 50 years. There are many teachers in my life. My niece is a teacher. And as it happens, I joined the faculty of Mount Royal University in Calgary last fall. So I'm a teacher. But I was thinking that there was more in life for me, that I was destined for greatness or something. I go through all this testing and they tell me I'm just going to teach history. So for the next 20 plus years of my life, I spent that time running away from what I'd been given to prove, with the intention of proving them wrong. And that's what I referred to and what you heard about in my intro as my 20-year desert experience. So I really identify with the biblical character of Moses. I'm not particularly religious, but if you know the story at all, here's this poor guy who's roaming around in the desert for 40 years with several hundred, maybe a few thousand people behind him. No idea where they're going. They're hoping more than anything that he knows where he's going. He doesn't really seem to know where he's going because they're wandering around in the desert for 40 years. Then he finally arrives at the border of where they're supposed to be. And all the people get to go in, but he gets laid off. somebody's standing at the border of, promised land saying, I'm sorry to inform you, but your position with the organization has been terminated effective immediately. You don't get to come in. So I really identify with this guy because for 20 years, that's kind of what I was doing, stomping my way through life like I was pounding away on muskeg, not really getting it. So it took me over 20 years to unpack what I'd been given and to make sense of what all that meant. And now for the last 30 years, I've been practicing in that space, and more than anything, what I've been doing is teaching. One person at a time, one group at a time, one talk at a time. So if any of you have been through that, if you're asking this question of yourself, what's my purpose? I'm inviting you, in addition to those two questions I gave you, to go back to any of that interest assessment work you may have done, and now maybe look at it again for the first time and start to really understand and unpack, well, what's it really telling you? And even more importantly, what's packed inside your life story that you've lived since you were given that information? Or maybe it's a conversation with a guidance counselor in high school that you had, or with somebody, it may have been a more recent conversation. All of these little pieces are packed full of information. And it's there for the asking. And when you start to unpack it through a lens, not behind your eyes, but within your heart, you start to get closer to what it really means. So when I started to look at the things that I was engaged in over those 20 years, when I experienced the profound frustration of being only smart enough to go from one mess into another just like it over and over and over and over again, when I experienced the frustration of being so angry and frustrated, being stuck in this crappy life, a life of looking forward to Fridays because I believed that I was meant to do something more, something important, but I wasn't smart enough to figure out what it was, and had to go through over 20 years of that to finally get back to a point where that awareness came back to me, and I was so frustrated, I was yelling out loud, if someone or something would just tell me what the hell I'm supposed to do with this life, I'll go ahead and do it because I can't imagine it's this. This is a waste. And in that moment of frustration, I felt this awareness come to me that, well, actually, you already have that answer. Remember that thing 20 years ago, average to above average intelligence, you should be a teacher. Remember that conversation? And it didn't come back to me as I told you so kind of an awareness, but rather it was really kind of somebody putting their arm around my shoulder. It felt like saying, you might find this helpful. Let's take another look at what's in this and see if it makes sense. And the coin dropped. And that's when I felt like my wheels started getting some traction, and I started moving in a direction rather than just spinning my wheels and stuck. So one of the other signposts in all of this can be in the myriad of things that we try as we're looking to figure this all out. Have you guys engaged at all, or do any of you use a to-do list? Heck yes. Always. Yep, always. Okay, I try. I identify with I try for sure. Has anyone thought about putting a to-do list together, but putting the to-do list hasn't popped up on their to-do list yet? I'm terrible with lists. Yes. One of the great joys in life is if you have a to-do list, if you can finally get it together to put one together, is that check mark when you get something done or when you cross it off. The reason I don't like to-do lists on Outlook is the Outlook to-do list is when you check it, it disappears. It's like, wait, I want to see the check mark. I want to go back at that tomorrow and say, I actually did that. At any rate, this can be an interesting way for you to start understanding what are the other messages that I have available to me that are telling me some things that I need to know? So you look at everything that's on my list. And so this could be another piece of homework for you. Check off, dopamine hit, got it. Is you can start with building a blank piece of paper and putting a list together of everything you can think of that you want to do. And it could include things you want to do, places you want to go maybe, things you need to do. You don't have to sort it. You don't have to prioritize it at the moment. It's just a stream of consciousness, what comes to mind. And for some of you, you might find this really liberating, and you might feel actually lighter because you're taking all this stuff that's swimming around in your head and occupying your mind. And I suspect for some of you at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're staring at the back of your eyelids, thinking about all this stuff instead of sleeping. And you're thinking about it because you're afraid you're going to forget what you need to do. And then you get up in the morning and you can't remember. So I'm inviting you to just stream of consciousness, take a few minutes and write down everything you can think of that you want on this list. Because now once you've got it, you've got it. Now the next thing is to think about, well, what caused me to put those items on this list? Why is this particular to-do? What's important about this particular to-do that it earned its way onto my list? You're right, actually, Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way, awesome content for you. And also great content there if you want to start journaling, if you haven't tried that yet. So think about those to-dos that are there and ask yourself, well, what is it that caused this to earn a spot on my to-do list? Now, for some, it might be pretty practical. There's a bill I have to pay. Okay, so I have to pay the bill. I'm not really excited about that, but it deserves to be on my list. Fair enough. But there may be a range of different things. I saw South Africa pop up when folks were registering this morning, and I thought, man, yep, I would, Cape Town on South Africa, I want that on my to-do list. You might also start thinking about, well, what are some of the things that you now are becoming aware of that you didn't put on that list? Why didn't those things earn a spot there? And as we move forward from here, as you go into tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after, it's helpful if you begin to develop the practice of building a list of things that you need to do that day. Because fundamentally, if you want to find your purpose, there's steps you have to take every day. You figure out, where do I want to be when this is done? And therefore, what does that mean for what I have to do today? And then you look at today, tomorrow, and see, well, are there any undones on my to-do list? And what is that telling you about what's on your to-do list? Do they deserve to be there? What message is that giving you? And that's important to reflect on. And then you also want to reflect on, well, what is it telling you when you have those things that were checked off? So a lot of you were saying, yeah, I take great delight in checking off the things that I've accomplished. So beyond the task of completion, knowing that the task is done, is there anything else that's packed in that task that you plan that's important? Now, you may be thinking, man, this is getting really anal, like, holy cow. You're going inside a grain of sand to find the grains that make up the grain of sand. Like, I'm going to get lost in this rabbit hole and may never be seen again. I'm just simply inviting a deeper level of awareness to the things that you're just naturally and probably unconsciously doing. And it's not to dwell on it, it's just simply to be aware of it. Is there anything I need to be paying attention to there? Is there anything that I've missed? It's all this stuff that's walking past you as you go through your day, and you're not just oblivious to it. You're taking a look as it comes by and being aware of, is there something there for me? It's kind of like when you open up your mailbox today, if you're like most of us, you're going to find a whole lot of stuff that has no relevance to you at all. But often if it's one of those days where it's all junk mail, those are the days where there's something that's really important that's stuck inside with all the junk mail. If you throw the whole thing out, you miss the thing that's really important. And then you may never know it was there because you threw it all out. So as I was going through this desert experience that I talked about earlier, and I, because of the work that I do, I do spend time going back into it to think about, well, what else did I learn while I was there? So recently I came across a letter that I'd sent home to my folks, because back then we didn't have email, we didn't have computers, and so some of you may be thinking, giving my earlier reference to Moses, that's the demographic I come from, almost, but not quite. But there's still learning in that when I think about some of the things that I was exposed to. So, for example, this will sound kind of silly, but I remember being at a gathering I was living in Jasper, Alberta, so this is a mountain town. And there was a bunch of people there. So there's one gal that I'm chatting with. I hadn't met her before. We're having a barbecue. And we were talking about music, and she said, "Have you ever heard of Jackson Browne?" And I said, "Jackson who?" Now, some of you may not know who Jackson Browne is, so you're kind of on the other end of this. He was just coming up when I was in Jasper. Now he's still playing. At any rate, it was interesting because, so this is now 40 years later, and I'm unpacking that conversation because I went back to a song that I remember playing in Jasper, and I used to do that for a living. And I looked again at the lyrics, and there was a little pearl of wisdom on the third line of the second verse that I started unpacking, and I thought, wow, where the hell has that been for the last 40 years? And of course, it had been right there, right under my nose. And so that's kind of the thing that I'm talking about, is that you may not have been on a desert or may not be in a desert experience now. But over the course of the life that you've lived up to and including this moment, what has gone past you? What have you experienced? Who have you encountered that still is holding something of value for you? Still has insight and wisdom for you, that's waiting to help you and guide you answer the question that you are seeking. And if purpose is something that you're seeking, or maybe you've got your purpose figured out, but now you want to look at, well, what's the next step? What's the next expression of my purpose? I'm hosting an event in June called A Day on Purpose. It'll be a virtual event now with COVID-19. And one of the panelists that's part of this knows exactly what's the what her purpose is. But what she said is, I have no idea what the expression of that purpose, what my next step is, what my next role looks like. And so that's what she's working on figuring out. And so for all of us, that's what we need to sort of figure out. That's what we need to unpack. Somebody just asked me what the line of the song is, and of course, now that I brought it up, I can't remember it right now, but I'll post it on my LinkedIn page and on my Facebook page. And Stephen, if there's a place to share info that these folks can get at, then we'll figure that out as well.
For sure.
So as I said before, our purpose isn't going to be found in the outside world. If that's where we're looking for it, that's not where it is. It's you know, if you can move your hand around and find out where your heart is and put your hand there, it's right inside your chest cavity, and it's inside what we might think is a muscle. For any of you that have done any reading on the heart, you'll probably know it's far more than just a muscle. If you've heard about heart math, you've learned that in the study of heart math, they've discovered that the heart has a brain, it has a consciousness, it has an awareness. It actually knows what's happening in the body often before the brain does. And it has an awareness and a way of knowing that is different than the mind. So as we get closer to how we feel about things, if we start paying attention with our heart as compared to analyzing things with a critical mind, we get an awful lot closer to the answer that we're seeking. You know, often when we look at the things that we experience, especially if it's failure, we might discount it as a mistake and move on. You just suck it up, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, popular expression. By the way, anybody that's familiar with physics would know that that's physically impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, unless you wanted to land on your nose. But in this respect, when I went through Royal Roads University through a coaching program a few years ago, my teammates gave me a nickname called Sensei Booker, which to this day feels pretty awkward. What they were talking about was they saw me as somebody who was very wise. So I want to tell you a little bit about wisdom, because I admit I am wise. However, that sounds boastful. Let me explain. Wisdom, mine, I won't speak of yours. My wisdom is a product of profound and repetitive stupidity. I have made every mistake a person can make on every day of the week and every month of the year, and I've done it more than once. If I can screw something up royally, I will in 5 different languages. And I've been doing that all the way through my life. The 20-year desert experience lasted for 20 years. It was primarily because I was so profoundly stupid and pig-headed to not accept the gift that I've been given when I was in grade 10 and busy trying to prove everybody wrong and make my point that I was whoever I imagined I was at that time, only to come back to realize it was in all of those failures that the wisdom that now enlightens my writing and positions my compassion and understanding so that I can better serve the people I work with. So that's where I think wisdom comes from. It's a great teacher. I'm not sure if you've had much exposure to spirituality. I'm not going to talk about it now because I'm concerned about time. But just quickly, spirituality is a place that allows us to have a loving conversation with ourselves. And just so we know, in my opinion, is spirituality does not require religion. Religion requires spirituality. There's nothing wrong with religion, but it's that inner awareness and inner way of knowing that can invite in and make that connection with yourself to where those answers will be found. So last thing I want to leave you with is, I really like this saying, because especially when you're trying to figure this question out or figure out what the next step might be, it feels like we feel like we're not getting anywhere, or we're not getting the answers. And I can remember, at the end of my desert experience, I felt this very, very strongly, that I've been knocking my head against walls for 20 years. And I couldn't imagine that life was what this had become, that I'd come this far to only come this far. It just didn't make sense. So I really learned through all of that figuring me out, it is challenging, and it takes time, and it takes work. The really cool thing about today isn't me and necessarily this topic, but there's 100 or so of you in this community that's global. And you have a community that you can interact with. There's people that could potentially collaborate with you, partner with you to help you figure this out. So it's really unpacking everything you've brought up to today, making sure you squeeze the meaning out of it, reflect on it, make sense of it, and then you're ready to move forward. If you don't learn the lesson at the moment it's offered to you, you've probably noticed this. It comes back over and over and over and over again.